All right, you guys ready for the word? All right, we've come a long way this last month talking about the meaning of your life. So we've been going through the Book of Ecclesiastes and this series called The Meaning of Your Life. Today, I want to call this a well-lived life. I want you to get to the end of your life and to be able to say, yeah, it was well-lived. It was well-lived. Perfect? No, that's not going to happen, but well-lived. I want you to have a well-lived life. Now, Solomon has been taking us on this crazy journey, and today I'm going to fast forward from chapter 5 all the way to chapter 12. You're going to have to read chapters 5 through 11 to figure out what else Solomon said. I'm going to get to chapter 12 and just move this real fast. Have you ever heard our kids count to 100? 1, 2, skip a few, 99, 100. Boom, they're there. That's what we're doing with this book of Ecclesiastes. We went through chapters 1 through 4. Now we're in chapter 12. But Solomon takes us on this journey to try to discover what the meaning of life is. And he starts out by basically saying everything's meaningless. It's just all meaningless. Life has no meaning. But now we get to the end and we realize or remember that Solomon is the wisest man on earth. Other than Jesus, the wisest man on earth. In fact, 1 Kings 4:29 says, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, breadth of understanding, as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else. Solomon was wise. Now I know, well, he was kind of wild with his thoughts in this process, but the Bible tells us clearly that God gave him wisdom and insight. So his process that he took us on in this book was to help us connect to some of the thoughts, some of the thinking, the rationale that we all have. And he takes us there to help us understand that it all ends up being meaningless. It's vanity. And he brings us down to what he calls the conclusion of the matter here in chapter 12. This is it, the conclusion of the matter. Now, there was an angel who appeared to a man and said, I will give you the wisdom of Solomon or $50 million. The man thought it was a test from God, so he took the wisdom of Solomon. The next morning, he's sitting at breakfast with his friends and he tells them what happened when this angel appeared to him. He said, and I took the wisdom of Solomon. And his friend said, well, now that you got all that wisdom, why don't you give us some words of wisdom? And the man thought for a minute, said, I should have taken the $50 million. Solomon calls this the conclusion of the matter. Now, I just want to tell you, if you're a young person here today, listen, pay attention, because God wants you to learn what it means to have a life that has meaning. If you're in your young 20s and 30s and you're trying to figure out life, God wants to help you make decisions today that will put you in a position where when you're 50, you won't be living with regret. And every single one of us, we've got to understand that our life matters, what we do matters, the example that we set matters, and today could set a course that impacts our future. So Solomon begins in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse number 1, with really a very poetic description of death. It's weird and it's funny. You could either get depressed by this or you could laugh it off as very funny. I choose laughter. And I encourage you to do the same. Watch this, Ecclesiastes 12:1. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come. Well, what are the days of trouble? The days of trouble he's talking about is when you get old. As you start getting older, because you've heard it said, getting old is not for sissies. Because it's hard, it's difficult. Things start breaking, things don't move like they used to. It hurts a whole lot more just to get up and move around. And yeah, so he's saying, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you say, I find no pleasure in them. And there's some of us in here, you understand this, you get this. It's like, this is hard. Just getting up in the morning sometimes is hard. I find no pleasure. And he said, before the sun and the light and the moon, the stars grow dark and the clouds return after the rain. It's a picture of the sun setting, things going dark, death. That's his picture of death. He goes on, verse number 3, when the keepers of the house tremble. He's talking about a man whose hand begins to shake in its old age. And the strong men stoop. You get older, you start getting shorter. Leaves give out, back gives out. When the grinders cease because they're few, now you're losing your teeth and you can't grind anymore. And those looking through the windows grow dim. So now you're losing your eyesight. He said, when the doors to the street are closed, and this is really a picture of your lips turning in when you go, yeah. That's like if you've ever done one of those pictures that shows you how old you are in 20 years. He's like, oh, no, don't like that. This is that picture. And he says, when the sound of grinding fades, again, because there's no teeth, the people rise up at the sound of birds. Sleep begins to elude you. But all their songs grow faint. Now you're losing your hearing. When people are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets because you're afraid of falling or afraid of getting knocked down because you're afraid you'll break a hip or can't get back up. Help, I've fallen and I can't get up. When the almond trees blossom, the almond trees have a white flower that blossoms and then it blows away. And that's a picture of your hair turning white and then turning loose. And the grasshopper drags itself along. And those of you that are a little older, you remember the Carol Burnett show? Remember Tim Conway, the little Tim Conway shuffle? You know, this is a picture of that. You know, the pace of life just really slows down. I know some of you are getting depressed right now. I told you, choose the funny route. Choose to laugh at yourself right now. And he said, and desire is no longer stirred. Sorry, that's a picture of sexual desire diminishing. Then people go to their eternal home. Mourners go about the streets. Remember him. Going back to remember your creator. Remember him before the silver cord is severed, your spinal cord is severed, the golden bowl is broken, your head's broken, the pitcher is shattered at the spring, and the wheel broken at the well, meaning there's no more circulation in this body. And the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. What is Solomon saying to us here? The first thing that I think he's saying is do what's important while there's still time. The days of trouble will come. Time will pass. You're going to get older. You're a little bit older right now than you were when you came here this morning. It's just time passes. And some of us think that we have all the time in the world to do all the things that we want to do. The only problem is time doesn't agree with you. See, some of us think that our most limited resources are money and possessions. No. How many of you know somebody that had made $1 million and then lost $1 million? Then what they do? They made $1 million again because they can get that back. Some people lose their health, whether they correct their mistakes, their eating habit, their workout, and they get their health back. But you can never get time back. Once time is gone, it's gone. Your most limited resource is time. There was a grandpa that was holding his little granddaughter, and she was inspecting his skin and saw the wrinkles and said, Grandpa, where'd you get all these wrinkles? He said, baby, that's the way God made me. When you start getting older, you just get wrinkles. She looks at her soft, smooth skin and says, well, how come I don't have any wrinkles? She said, well, baby, that's the way God made you. You're young and you got smooth, soft skin. She thought for a minute. She said, Grandpa, you think God's doing a better job making things now than he did back then? It seems that way as the older we get and things start falling apart and things don't work the way they always did. But what Solomon is saying is, if you want to know what the meaning of life is, you want to know what the meaning of anything is, the meaning of everything, then remember your creator. Right now, in this moment that you have, remember your creator. Now, what was he saying? He wasn't just saying, remember that God exists, because he was talking to Jewish people. Jewish people believed in God. So he wasn't talking about that. He was talking about something much deeper than that. The Hebrew word zakar means to mark something so you can recognize it later. And so what he was telling them is, remember, make a mark right now. Mark something right here, right now. I told you, you're making decisions today that could impact the rest of your life. Make a mark right now. Put boundaries and markers and reminders in your life so that you will stay on the right path and remember in your latter years what you decided right now. It's like when you got married. When you were married, you exchanged rings with your spouse. That ring becomes a marker. It becomes a reminder of your vows that you made to your spouse. It was weird getting used to wearing a ring at first when you put it on that ring finger. It was the original fidget spinner. That's what it was. You just played with it, spin with it. But it's a reminder of your vows. And what Solomon is saying is mark something in your life right now that you'll remember in the future of the commitment that you made today. So what was he saying? Remember your Creator. Remember that you were created with a divine purpose here on this earth. Remember that you were created for a reason. You were created with a God-given purpose here on this earth. So the goal is to do what God has called you to do while you still have time. Don't miss it. You see, a whole lot of us, we live our lives like, I want to someday. One of these days, I'm going to get to it. When my ship comes in, rather than today's the day. And what Solomon is saying is mark something in your life right now that'll keep you on the right path so that you can get done what God has called you to do while you still have time. Do the most important things while you have time. Now, I'm 61 years old. God's blessed me with some good health. I can still do most of the things that I've always done. Not everything, but most. It's not a question of can I do it? It's a question of what's the price I have to pay to do it? How much recovery time am I going to need to hike that mountain or to whatever it is? How much recovery time? How much am I going to hurt? What am I going to risk breaking, pulling, straining? That's always the question. So that's why multivitamins, that's the way to go. Yes, my multivitamins of choice are Advil, Tylenol, and Relief Factor. They work beautifully. But look, here's the point that Solomon's making. He says, if you keep pushing off to the future, what you're called to do right now, eventually you're going to run out of days. And there's something that God has put you on this earth to accomplish. It's something that makes you come alive. It's something that wakes you up and gets you out of bed in the morning. And it also glorifies God. And what Solomon is saying, remember what you're created for. And get busy doing it right here, right now, while you still have time, before the days of trouble come. Because there's come a day when you're going to say, whew, this is getting old, it's not for sissies. I got a shoulder that kind of messes with me. And let me tell you something. Just to get up off the ground, it shouldn't be a difficult thing. But when your shoulder doesn't work, it kind of messes everything up. Anybody having trouble with your wrist? Anybody got wrist issues? I like to do lots of push-ups, but when the wrists aren't working, it makes everything else hard to do. There will come a day, and time will not be friendly to us, when you can't do the things that you always did. So Solomon is saying, do it now while there's still time. Get done what you're supposed to do. God has put you here for a reason. Get busy doing it. Here's the second thing. Look at verse number 9. It says, not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and he wrote what was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads. They're collected sayings like firmly embedded nails given by one shepherd. Now let that sink in just for a minute, because I'm going to come back to the goads and the firmly embedded nails, or one version is the well-driven nails. Because I'll explain in just a minute, but he says they're given by one shepherd. Obviously, that is a picture of Jesus Christ, our great shepherd. So he's saying the words of the wise, they're like goads, collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. And then verse 12 says, be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Anything outside of what Jesus says, be warned, my son. You look for answers outside of this word, be warned, my son. You try to listen to somebody else and what this world is saying, what's culturally acceptable outside of this, you be warned, my son. You listen to the shepherd, listen to Jesus. And he said, of making many books, there's no end. You got all kinds of stuff you can go out there and study and trying to find the reason for life and the meaning for life. And you can search for it in nature. You can search for it in wisdom. You can search for it in education. You can search for it in intellect. You can search for it in religion. He said, look, these books, there's no end. You can search all around, but you're going to end up wearing the body out, wearing your mind out. So what is he saying? Number 2, he's saying be humble and open to change. This is kind of the counterpoint to the point that I said about you're created to do something, get busy doing it now while you still have time, but you gotta be humble and open to change, because just because you're called to do it doesn't mean you know how to do it yet. We may be called to do something, but we still need people who will speak into our lives that can give us wisdom, words of wisdom that are like goads, sayings that are like embedded nails. See, every single one of us went through this, especially, you aggressive type. The entrepreneurial type. You want to get out there, you want to do it, and you don't want anybody to tell you anything different. And most all of us thought at one time, my parents are old and they don't know anything, but then something happens. The older you get, the smarter your parents became, right? Now, I'm talking about all of you because my mother's here and I never thought that about you, Mom, never. But we all felt like that, they're not in touch with, what's current, what's hip, what's happening, what's relevant. Mark Twain said it like this. He said, when I was a boy of 14, he said, my father was so ignorant, I could hardly stand to be around him. But when I became 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in 7 years. And that's the way it is. You got to be humble and open to change. Yes, you're called to do something, but you may not know exactly how to do it. And you may need people in your life that can speak words of wisdom. Sir Isaac Newton said this. He said, if I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And there are people that God has put in our lives here in this church body that have been there. They've done that. They've seen it. They got the t-shirt. They can tell you what's coming next. Young people, please listen to the generation that has gone before. We're standing on their shoulders. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we can see further because of those who have gone before. So Solomon, in verse number 11, he says that words of the wise, they're like goads, like firmly embedded nails. What's a goad? It's a pointed stick that was used to prod cattle along. Now, it wasn't intended to hurt the cattle. Their hide was very thick. It was more of an annoyance than anything, but it was used to motivate them to move. Firmly embedded nails, well-driven nails. What's that? Well, nails are driven in to keep things in place. So what's he saying here? He's saying these words of the wise, they're like the goads that motivate us to move us in the right direction. The firmly embedded nails, the words of wisdom, hold us on that path. They keep us on that path. And there are people in this church, there are people in your life that have words of wisdom that can motivate you and keep you on the right path if you're open or humble and open to change and willing to listen. In fact, Acts 9, verse 3 through 5. This is powerful. I know I got to hurry, but let's just, this is good. Thank you. All right. Whew. I will. I should get a chair and just sit down. Because look at this. Look, Acts 9:3 says this. As he journeyed, he came near Damascus. This is the story of when Saul was converted and he became Paul. As he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, who are you, Lord? The Lord said, I'm Jesus, whom you're persecuting. It's hard for you to kick against the goads. What is he? Because the cattle, when the little prod, the goad, they'd kick back against it. He said, it's hard for you to kick against these goads. Well, what do you say? What are goads? Words of the wise. These words of the wise, what were they doing to Saul? Words that were spoken. What words were spoken that were like goads that were poking him and prodding him and motivating him? You know what it was? Saul had just been at the stoning of Stephen. And Saul had given consent to the stoning of Stephen. And as Stephen, I want you to think about this. Here's a man who was martyred for Jesus Christ. And look what happened when his life was taken for the sake of the gospel. Sometimes we question when bad things happen. Here's a perfect example how God uses something bad to make something good. Stephen is being stoned to death, but while he's being stoned to death, he's preaching the gospel. And you know who's hearing those words? Saul. Saul, who is standing there telling them, throw the rocks, kill him, take his life. But he's hearing those words. Jesus loves you. Jesus is your Savior. Jesus is risen from the dead. And he's hearing these words, and those words are like goads. They're like well-embedded nails, and they won't let him go. And finally, Jesus appears to him on this road to Damascus and says, you can't kick against the goads, can you, Saul? No, I can't, because the words are haunting me. There are words that God has put inside of our lives that we can speak into others that will be with them forever, that will not just motivate them in the right direction, but will keep them on the right path. There's no doubt some of your moms and your dads and people who love you and elders and deacons and people that are in your life that love you have spoken words of encouragement to you. And yes, there have been times in our life when we were rebellious, we were punks, we didn't want to listen, but those words never left us. Those words stayed in our heart. They stayed in our mind. They continued to motivate us in the right direction. Thank God for somebody who was willing to speak words of wisdom to us. Thank God for somebody who wasn't afraid to speak into our lives. So how do we know who's got the words of wisdom? But he said, listen, it's that one shepherd. Where's that one shepherd? What about when Jesus doesn't talk? You know what he does? We need to listen to people who have the heart of the shepherd, who have the mind of the shepherd, men and women of God who have been talking with Jesus. We've been talking with Jesus and we know what Jesus would say. And so we'll give you words of wisdom that come straight from the word of God. Deacons, men who can speak the heart and the mind of Jesus Christ. All right, musicians, come on, I gotta stop. Let's go to verse number 13. Now all has been heard, and here's the conclusion of the matter. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. This is it. Solomon took us on this crazy journey, searching for purpose and meaning everywhere. And he finally says, this is it. Pay attention, this is it. This is the conclusion that I've come to. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the duty of all mankind. This is my duty. This is your duty. It's your duty. It's your responsibility. It's your mandate. It's your calling. Fear God. What is he saying? Here's what I believe he's saying. Find your identity in God. Find your identity in God. Solomon has shown us what a life devoted to just about anything and everything can look like, and he ends up saying it's all meaningless. But he gets to the end of the book and he says the only life that's worth living is a life that is not devoted to itself. Not devoted to me and my wants. The life that's well lived, the life that's worth living, is one that fears God and keeps his commandments. Not what I figure out I want. I just want to do what God says. Now listen, this is contrary to everything that we hear about in our world today. Everything we hear about in our world is you find your happiness within yourself. You find your joy within yourself. You find your purpose within yourself. And whatever you want, whatever you like, you be you. That's not what Solomon concludes here. He said, I searched for all that. I did all of that. What the world will say, hey, you're a guy, you want to be a girl, be a girl. You're a girl, want to be a guy, be a guy. Fine. You want to be neither, be neither. You want to be both, be both. You just be you. You find your own identity. What Solomon is saying, I tried all that. It didn't work. It's meaningless. The conclusion of the matter is to fear God. Have an awe and a reverence for a holy God and keep his commandments. That's our duty. That's what we should do. Not fear God like a horror movie, but to fear him in reverence and awe, revering him so much that we would never want to do anything that would dishonor him. Because listen, you're either gonna honor God or you're gonna honor man in your life, one of the two. You're gonna live for God, you're gonna live for man. You say, well, I fear no one. Listen, if you end up living for others, somebody's pat on the back, somebody's like on your Facebook, somebody's applause, somebody's recognition, you're gonna get exhausted with life because there will never be enough likes or pats on the back. If you live for yourself, I'm the only one that makes me happy. I do what I want. I don't care what anybody else thinks. You're going to be depressed. You know why? Because every single one of us know people, especially over the last couple of years during shutdown and lockdowns and everything else, who took their lives. And most of us, when they took their lives, we thought, why in the world would they take their life? They had everything. They had everything. Why would somebody take their life if they had everything? You know why? Because everything doesn't give you meaning. Everything doesn't give you purpose. Everything doesn't fill the emptiness and the void inside. You can have everything and still have no hope, because that's not what gives meaning to life. So you can either be exhausted, you can be depressed, or you can choose to live for God, because He's the one who gives meaning. He's the one who gives purpose. He's the one who adds value to your life. I don't know where you are in your walk with God, but this is what I know. That we here in America, and even in His church, we have lost the fear of God. We lost the fear of God when we let God get kicked out of our schools and kicked out of our courthouses and kicked out of every government agency. We sat back and we refused to defend God, and we've blasphemed God, and we've taken God's name in vain, and we've rejected God, and we've turned our backs on God, and we've hidden from God, and we've been ashamed of God, and we didn't want to be associated with people who called themselves Christians, and we have lost the fear of God. But what we need to understand and what we really need to realize is that only the fear of God is what will bring back His blessing in our lives. Only the fear of God will bring healing to our lives, healing in this nation, and salvation to our souls. Only the fear of God